London, 1888. The East End, a labyrinth of dark alleys, gaslit streets, and the shadow of despair looming over the impoverished communities. The fog rolls in, clinging to the cobblestones as the city holds its breath in fear. Amid this bleak setting, a nightmare unfolded, one that would haunt the streets of London and the minds of generations for over a century. A series of gruesome, unsolved murders that would baffle detectives, terrify citizens, and captivate the world. This is the story of one of history's most infamous killers, Jack the Ripper. The Whitechapel district of London in 1888 was a place where light barely touched the squalor of its narrow, overcrowded streets. A community built on the desperate hope of survival in an unforgiving world. Tens of thousands lived in overcrowded slums where disease and poverty were a constant companion. The conditions in Whitechapel were deplorable, and with few opportunities for work, many residents turned to crime, or, in the case of many women, prostitution, as their only means of survival. While the rest of London prospered, the East End was neglected. The area was home to the most vulnerable members of society: immigrants, the destitute, and those with nowhere else to go. With widespread unemployment and families crammed into rotting tenements, crime and vice were rampant. Prostitution, in particular, was an unfortunate but widespread reality, as women desperate for food, shelter, and security often had no other choice. It was in this chaotic, desperate environment that an unknown figure emerged, a killer who preyed on the most vulnerable. Between August and November 1888, the East End would become the stage for one of the most gruesome and mysterious murder sprees in history. Jack the Ripper is widely believed to have murdered 5 women, the victims whose deaths have come to be known as the Canonical Five. These 5 women, each with their own tragic story, were killed in such a brutal and horrific manner that they would forever be remembered in infamy. On August 31, 1888, the first victim, Mary Ann Nichols, was found lying in Bucks Row, a narrow, desolate street in Whitechapel. Her throat was slashed so deeply that her windpipe was severed, and her abdomen had been grotesquely mutilated. She had been evicted from her lodging house just hours before her death and was seen in the company of a man shortly before she was found. Her murder marked the beginning of a terrifying spree that would leave the community and police utterly perplexed. Mary Ann was one of many women in Whitechapel who had turned to prostitution as a means to survive. Her tragic life reflects the desperation many women faced in a time when poverty and survival were often intertwined. Despite her life being marked by hardship, her murder would set the stage for the terror that would follow. On September 8th, just days after Nichols's death, Annie Chapman was found in the backyard of a house on Hanbury Street. Like Nichols, her throat was slashed and her body was mutilated. The killer had removed her uterus, a detail that suggested some anatomical knowledge or possibly even medical training. There were witnesses who saw her talking to a man shortly before her death, but the descriptions they gave were vague and inconsistent. This would be a pattern in many of the Ripper cases: witnesses who could offer little useful information, despite the fact that people were often close by when the murders occurred. Chapman's death shocked the community, but it was only the beginning of an even more terrifying series of killings. September 30th, 1888 became known as the double event when 2 murders took place on the same night. The first victim, Elizabeth Stride, was found in Dutfield's yard. She, too, had been attacked, but her injuries were less severe than the others. It's believed that the killer was interrupted before he could fully carry out his brutal plans, as Stride's body showed no signs of the typical mutilations that had marked the previous murders. Stride's murder was peculiar for another reason. She was a Swedish immigrant who had lived a difficult life, marked by abusive relationships and financial struggle. She was also a prostitute, like many of the Ripper's victims, but her death came at the hands of someone who, for reasons still unknown, cut her life short but did not perform the same gruesome mutilations as on the others. Less than an hour later, Catherine Eddowes was discovered in Mitre Square, her body mutilated in the same horrific way as the others. Eddowes had been released from police custody earlier that evening after being arrested for drunkenness, and it is believed that the killer found her while she wandered the streets. The brutality of her murder sent shockwaves through the community, and it seemed to confirm that the Ripper's spree was growing more violent with each passing day. The final victim in this grisly series was Mary Jane Kelly. Unlike the others, Kelly was murdered in her own room, a private, intimate setting that made her death even more unsettling. On November 9, 1888, her mutilated body was found in her room at Miller's Court, her injuries so severe that she was barely recognizable. Her murder was more violent and gruesome than the others, and it remains one of the most shocking aspects of the entire case. Mary Jane Kelly's death marked the end of the Ripper's killing spree, or at least the end of the murders attributed to him. Though some investigators continued to believe the killings could have been the work of the same person, the end of Kelly's life marked the end of a reign of terror that had gripped the East End for months. After the murders, speculation about the identity of the killer spread like wildfire. Who could commit such horrific acts, and why? Over the years, many theories have emerged, each more fascinating and chilling than the last. The mystery surrounding the killer's identity only deepened. Some believed the killer had some sort of medical or surgical training due to the precision of the mutilations. Others speculated that Jack the Ripper could have been a butcher, familiar with the anatomy of the human body. The most extravagant theory involved members of the British royal family. Some have even suggested that Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's grandson, was the killer, though no solid evidence has ever been found to support this claim. One of the most commonly mentioned suspects is Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant and barber who lived in Whitechapel. Kosminski had a known hatred for women and was later institutionalized for mental health issues. In recent years, a shawl found near the body of Catherine Eddowes was allegedly tested for DNA, and the results pointed to Kosminski. However, critics have raised doubts about the authenticity of this evidence, and it remains inconclusive. Other suspects include Montague Druitt, a barrister who allegedly suffered from mental illness and was found dead in the Thames shortly after the murders stopped. Michael Ostrog, a Russian criminal and physician, and even the famous painter Walter Sickert have also been proposed as potential suspects, but no clear evidence has ever linked any of them to the crimes. Perhaps one of the most enduring aspects of the Ripper case are the letters supposedly sent by the killer. These letters, many of which were later revealed to be hoaxes, added a layer of intrigue and sensationalism to the case. The Dear Boss letter, which famously introduced the name Jack the Ripper, was one such example. The letter mocked the police and seemed to taunt them for their inability to catch the killer. While some believe the letters were genuine, most experts believe they were nothing more than an attempt to fuel the media frenzy surrounding the murders. The murders of Jack the Ripper were more than just a series of horrifying crimes. They were a wake-up call for Victorian society. The Ripper's killings exposed the brutal realities of life in the East End and forced the public to confront the dire conditions faced by the poor and the vulnerable. Activists and social reformers used the murders as a platform to demand change, highlighting the overcrowded slums, unsanitary living conditions, and the rampant poverty that plagued the working class. The Ripper's crimes, though horrific, became a symbol of the inequality and neglect that the lower classes had long suffered under. Today, the case continues to fascinate, fueling a macabre tourism industry in the streets of Whitechapel. Countless books, documentaries, films, and TV shows have been inspired by the mystery, keeping Jack the Ripper's legacy alive in popular culture. The dark allure of the unknown has cemented the killer's place as one of history's most notorious figures. The investigation itself also left a lasting impact on criminal investigations worldwide. The case is often cited as one of the earliest examples of criminal profiling, and the media's role in shaping public opinion became a focal point for later investigative practices. Jack the Ripper's story is one of darkness and mystery, a grim reminder of the violence, inequality, and fear that marked a bygone era. Though the identity of the killer remains a tantalizing enigma, the legacy of these murders continues to haunt the streets of Whitechapel and the minds of those who dare to delve into the unknown. This has been the chilling tale of Jack the Ripper. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into one of the most greatest mysteries. If you've enjoyed this journey, share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.